Welcome to the Authentically Successful Show. I'm Carol Schultz, founder and CEO of Vertical Elevation, a talent equity and leadership coaching and advisory firm. Listen at the end of the show for information about becoming my next guest on one of the most important podcasts for building thriving companies. Here we go. Hi, and welcome to the Authentically Successful Show. My guest today is Joe Kinsella, founder and CTO of CloudHealth Technologies, which was acquired by VMware in October of 2018. Joe, welcome to the show.
Oh, great to be here, Carol, and great to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. So I just have to say, in all the years I've been doing this, you rank in among the top of my favorite founders of tech firms. In many ways. And I think that even though you're no longer leading a company, I really want to talk to you a lot about CloudHealth and how you built it and how it came to fruition. Tell me a little bit about how the idea behind CloudHealth Technologies came to you.
Yeah, I don't think it was much of an accident, Carol. I think you look at my career and I spent a lot of time in the infrastructure management market. And so I would say I was a bit of an expert in infrastructure management. And then I did have the early light bulb moment of realizing that cloud computing and specifically the public cloud was going to be a big transformation in industry. And so I spent a fair amount of time on cloud computing and became something of an expert in that space. So the intersection of those two spaces of infrastructure management and cloud computing is really what CloudHealth Technologies was all about. So I had this idea that somewhere at that intersection, there was a business for me to build. And that really was the genesis of CloudHealth. And then, I set off on the journey that eventually led to founding the company.
What's the biggest problem that CloudHealth solves, under the auspices of, CloudHealth by VMware now?
Yeah, I think the thing we became best known for is so many companies just, jumped into the public cloud and they started putting infrastructure there and building applications and doing everything in the cloud. And there was always this awkward moment that would happen with every single company where suddenly they realized how expensive the public cloud actually was. And so what CloudHealth did better than anyone for its era, and still today does better than anyone, is really help customers get control of the costs of their cloud and then drive efficiency in their consumption of the cloud. So it's I think that's probably what we're best known for. There's many other things we did over the years, but I think almost every customer journey starts with cost management.
Right. So, but these are people that might have been working with AWS or Azure or, Oracle's cloud or any of the other cloud services?
That's correct. Yeah. So it crosses all public clouds. The product also goes into your data center as well, and will support private clouds as well. But when I started the company, it was primarily AWS, at the vision of all public clouds. But the reality was, for a number of years in the early foundation of CloudHealth, all that really mattered was AWS. It took a while for Azure and Google and Alibaba and other public clouds to really become meaningful.
And tell us a little bit about your background prior to CloudHealth.
My background is a computer science degree, software developer. I like to tell people I've been doing the same thing since I was 11 years old, which is I've been building software products. At 11, I got hooked on an Apple II and just, thought it was the most amazing device I'd ever seen. And from there, really, I like to think that's all I've done, which is I've been a software developer. I've been a tech lead. I've been an architect. I've been a multi-time VP of engineering, multi-time CTO, started two companies along the way. But at its core, it's all about building software products that matter to customers. That's really what drives me. And I'll say, as I got wiser in my career, I learned it's not just about software products that matter to customers. It's about building software products that matter to customers with really good people that you want to do it with.
Yeah, well, that's really great. And that leads me to another question, because as you and I both know, so many technical founders want to be the CEO of their company. And you are an exception to that. So tell me a little bit about your thought process and what had you say, I need to bring someone in that's actually an experienced CEO, and how you found Dan Phillips to become, become your partner.
Yeah, that was an interesting story. I had like, my advisors were very careful in the early days to never, to always say I needed to bring in a business partner. They never suggested I bring in a CEO. And I think they just assumed I would never cede the CEO title to anybody else. And so it really came down to this formative meeting I had, which is I put together 6 or 7 advisors that were advising me throughout the whole process of founding CloudHealth. And I would go have coffee with them once or twice a week. And each of them really had a skill set I didn't have. And so they didn't know each other for the most part. And I never met with them as a group. And I finally brought them together at this key point in the company. And I brought them into the venture firm where I was an EIR. And I brought them together.
Let me just interrupt for anybody who's listening who doesn't know that stands for executive in residence.
Yeah, exactly. So entrepreneur in residence. Yeah. So, and I was, and it was Northbridge Venture Partners in Boston. And so I brought them together and I said, I have 2 questions for you tonight. I said, I'm going to brief you on the business. And question number 1 is, should I continue bootstrapping this business or should I go raise venture capital? And question number 2 is, do I go get a CEO or am I the CEO? And then we just had an open debate and discussion.
Yeah.
And I think the advice came back almost universally of 1, you should go raise venture capital because this market's happening now.
Yeah.
And 2 is, you don't want to be the CEO, so why would you even consider it? And the truth is if you took the Venn diagram of what I'm passionate about and the Venn diagram of what I needed a CEO to do for CloudHealth, they almost barely touched.
Right. They were diametrically opposed. Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think that's so great that you recognize that, to focus on where your genius is, right?
Yeah. And that was the key for me was finding a partner I could trust. So
yes.
It's one of those things where when you're going to cede that level of control to somebody, you damn well better make sure that it's somebody who actually you can trust. And when the door's closed and you're not there to be present for a decision, they're going to make the best decision for customers, for the business, and for the people in the business. And that's how I found Dan.
Yeah. And what was it about Dan that, that had him have you feeling like this is somebody I can really trust and that I can really be a partner with?
I'll tell a story I probably shouldn't tell. So just between the 2 of us, right?
Yeah, right. Make sure we don't tell Dan.
Yeah. So Dan and I had done a previous company together. I was VP of engineering. He was CEO. Right. And the company went through some hard times and ended up acquired by a big public company. And the thing that kept the management team together was there was a management carve out where there was several $1 million that the board and Dan would be able to allocate to the executives of that team. And when the deal was closed, Dan pulled us together for a Monday morning staff meeting. And he said, this is going to be a short meeting and I only have 1 agenda item. He said, so what do I do with this carve out? He said, there's 2 choices before us. He said, choice 1 is you have me allocated to all of you and you worked hard, you deserve it. And, and you all go home with a great payday. Or choice 2 is we say, you know what? It wasn't just us that got us here. And so we need to share this with all the key talent in the organization. And the conversation lasted 10 minutes. We chose choice 2. And, a lot of people made money that otherwise wouldn't have made money from that deal as a result of his decision.
Yeah, that's really great. And speaking of making money, that leads me to another question. So TechCrunch, it's never been publicly announced how much you were acquired for. TechCrunch has it at somewhere north of $500 million. But you and I had a conversation long ago. And I asked you, as I ask founders all the time, do you know what your exit strategy is? Are you going to IPO? Are you going to sell? What? And you said to me, and I believe this is a quote, well, when you're the leader in the market, you typically IPO.
Yes.
Right. Of course, it's not a guarantee. It's not at 100%, but that's what you said to me. And you were the leader in the market and you did not IPO. So what was it about this deal, how it came to you that made sense for you, for you all to decide to actually have the company be acquired rather than continuing on your journey and going into an IPO?
Yeah. And, and I think I'd only amend one thing you said. I think a leader in a multi-billion-dollar market.
Okay.
The multi-billion-dollar part, I remember I always, and I still believe that today, Carol, because I think what happened with us was we started getting approached in 2015 and 16 with opportunities to be acquired. And that's kind of like, as an entrepreneur, that's a gut check of like, what are you really trying to do?
Yeah.
And,
you're on the right
they were
path.
very large tech companies, and some of the deals were quite good. And, it was not easy, but we eventually always got to know in these deals, right? And we reached a point where we realized if we're going to build a public company, we're going to have to do a lot of things that we weren't doing. And so part of that was we went out and we raised a big D round of venture capital led by Kleiner Perkins. We brought in a new CEO. So Dan helped recruit in his replacement. We needed to do some things on the product side. There were some acquisitions we were going to have to do. And so there was a lot of hard work of scaling the business. And maybe, in a lot of engineers talk about technical debt. There's some organizational debt you build up when you have hyper growth. It's unavoidable, which is, I think I saw somebody on Twitter say, whatever a company looks like on the outside, it's 10 times worse on the inside. And I think that's true of any hyper growth company. And we were that hyper growth company with up and to the right charts. But what happened is at the time we were kind of marching towards an IPO, VMware came in. It's like right time, right message. Love the cultural alignment of the company, like the synergy of a lot of the things I needed to go out and acquire companies for were sitting there in terms of intellectual property inside VMware. And so it just all aligned and got me to a point I realized, like, if there is a deal to take, this is the deal to take because the alignment is so good. But yeah, I think that's how I got there. It was a combination of all of those.
So speaking of culture, that's, when you look at when you started building the company, I always found, looking at it from an outsider, close to a lot of people over there, found you all to have a really fantastic culture at CloudHealth. Did you and Dan sit down and say, hey, what kind of culture do we want to build and how do we go about doing that?
It's funny, we really didn't. The culture, in many ways, people talk about the culture is, how you behave, what you permit, It was basically just, if you look at the culture, it was almost a synthesis of Dan and I. And Dan was a tremendous culture builder. So he had more skill in kind of synthesizing that DNA, but you look at like kind of the obsession over customers, the transparency, the collaboration, the investment in our people. Like these were all tenets that represented kind of how Dan and I got together in our respective careers. And they just kind of manifested themselves into our culture. It was only later we codified it. And when we codified it, I looked at it, I was like, that's me, that's Dan and I. And, so it really became who we were. And then it became who our employees. We hired people in our image, and then they reinforced and then in some cases adapted that culture to make it better. I mean, some of the people you brought into the company, you must remember this, just, we're people who really helped shape and, hone that culture.
I had a question I was going to ask you and I just lost it. Well, it'll come back to me. Is there anything in? Oh, I know what it was. If looking back, so you founded the company officially, was that in late 2012 or I'm trying to remember.
It was early to late, mid 2012.
Mid 2012. Okay, fantastic. And because you and I were then introduced, it was sometime in 2013.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, and then you sold the company, I mean, really 6 years after you kind of started it, which is pretty impressive for that much, for that much money. And if you look back over that 6-year period, where would you say from a culture standpoint, from a talent strategy standpoint, where were your mistakes and what did you learn from those? And what did you have to do differently to
I thought you said this was a 45-minute podcast.
Yeah, right.
2 hours for my mistakes. I think we got a lot of things right. So, but of the mistakes we made is in some cases, we just didn't invest in scale where we should have invested in scale. And so it's one of those really difficult decisions as an entrepreneur, which is you don't want to prematurely scale because you end up making investments that often are wasted.
That's right.
But you also don't want to be too late in scaling because you incur, organizational debt as a result of that. And so I think that's just one of those things where it's a bit of an art. And I don't know that any two situations, like I don't think I can look back with hindsight and know everything we should have done correctly. If I replayed that movie again, I probably would make many of the same mistakes, but I wished we'd invested more in scaling. And so there was a point in the company where the hyperscaling had started, had gone along enough where we knew it was actually, it was going to be a train ride, moving really fast for a long period of time. And that was the point, to really make the investments. And it would have slowed us down as a business, to make the investments, systematize things, put the right processes in place. And we did it in some places and we didn't do it in other places. And so where we did it, we were able to adapt and grow and scale those as we went from a company that, was less than 20 people to eventually was over 500 people. Right. And, but where we didn't make those investments, we certainly paid for them.
So when you look at, how did you go about traditionally finding your prospects? Was it outreach? Was it, what was, outbound versus inbound, right? Marketing.
Yeah. It was, initially, when you're building a new product category, nobody cares about you. You can have a website. You can push out your brand as much as you want. It does not matter. No one's going to find you because you're building a new product category for a problem that the vast majority of the market misunderstands or doesn't care about, right? And so we had to go find every prospect in the early days. I would say our first 100 customers, we had to go find the people who fit the profile that we were looking for and then convince them that, talk to them about the problem that we knew they had and then convince them that we had the solution for the problem. And then there's a point, that was the beginning of the business. Like after we got to product market fit, we reached a point where then we switched to scaling up the education of the broader market. So we started teaching people what the market was all about so that we could do more one-to-N and it wasn't, one-on-one with each prospective customer. And then branding came later, but it was an evolution, which is it was a street fight to get the first customers because, you really have to get very targeted. And I always tell entrepreneurs when you're in that early phase, especially when you're in the pre-product market phase, there's this great 5 criteria that are presented by a Silicon Valley professor and entrepreneur for the Silicon Valley called Stephen Blank. And he calls it the early evangelist. And you're an early evangelist. You're like a customer who will adopt a product early in a particular market if you meet these 5 criteria. And like off the cuff, it's like you have a problem, you have a problem, you are actively looking for a solution to the problem, you've cobbled together pieces and parts of a solution because you care so much about that problem, and you have a budget that if there was a solution to this, you would spend money on solving it. I always push entrepreneurs to that definition because you've got to, when you're in that early phase, the to-do list has to be exactly right. You have to be talking to the right people. You can't waste time on conversations with people who will tell you nice things, but at the end of the day, they're really not people who are going to grow your product in your business.
And it's great that you said that because you so often, and of course, everything you just said is not news to me, and I'm sure not news to you either at this point. We've been doing this long enough that, there's certain things that a founder has to have if they're going to even have a chance in hell of being a success, right? And I think so often people talk about, an entrepreneur will come up and like, oh, I've got this great idea for a product. Now let's go find a solution. Let's go find somebody who needs that instead of looking for the problems first, which is what you did, right? When you had this epiphany, this is a problem that needs to be solved.
Yes.
And then building a platform that would then solve that problem.
That's right. Yeah.
How often do you, I know you're doing some entrepreneurial work in Boston, and I want you to tell me about that a little bit more, some of the work that you've been doing, but how often do you bump into a founder who says, God, I've got this really great idea. I want to figure out if it can be sold, rather than the right way, again, which I think is the more effective way, is finding a problem that needs a solution to it.
Yeah, I would say many entrepreneurs are building feature companies. Is what they've done is they've come up with a better mousetrap, and then they want the world to know about the better mousetrap. And I always tell people, and it's become popular to talk about pivoting. You You fail fast, you pivot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing that people don't talk about pivoting is it's really hard and it's emotionally painful and it costs money and it costs time. And it's a very expensive proposition. So I like to tell people the better path is telescoping, which is start with a big market in a big problem space and then telescope your way down to the specific problem that you actually want to solve. And when you do that, everything's narrowing and you're not pivoting and you're not shifting directions fundamentally and taking the emotional cost and the lost time. And instead what you're doing is you're just honing. You're getting more refined and clearer on what it is you're targeting. And so but I don't see that often. Like I think most people today start with an idea for a product and then try to go figure out how they can build a business around that idea.
Right. Yeah. You talked earlier about, your advisors and so on, saying, this market's going to explode. You need to go out and get venture capital. And, I talked to a lot of founders and so many of them are bootstrapping. And I always ask the following question. Well, when determining, are you going to continue bootstrapping or, taking an A round, for example, can you get from point A to point B in the same period of time?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're going to bootstrap and it's going to take you a year longer, how much are you going to lose? Are you going to be able to get where you want to be? Is somebody else going to beat you there?
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes the founders I talk to that are still bootstrapping is the fear of the wrong kind of interjection from their institutional partners.
Right. Yes. Well, I mean, that
how did you handle that?
Yeah. I mean, that is like the dirty little secret of venture capital is the moment you take that money, you give up a substantial amount of control over your business. And so you have to be ready for that. And to be honest, you also give up sleep because the moment you take money, you now feel that obligation to return that money with a multiple. Exactly. So I think for us, it was the way I looked at it was I didn't really have a choice. If one of the challenges that I think people don't talk about enough is the importance of luck and timing when it comes to startups. So many people talk about, they glorify the entrepreneur as though the entrepreneur is brilliant and they figured everything out and they built this wonderful business. And at its core, there's many things. Like you need a good idea, you need good people, you need good execution, but you need a whole hell of a lot of luck. And a whole hell of a lot of luck, I think, starts with market timing. And so if you miss the market timing window for a particular idea, you have a really substantial difference of what your company could be. If you hit the height of the market timing, you could have a fantastic exit. And if you hit the bottom, you could have a failure. And I always go back to the idea for CloudHealth for me was 2010. I tried to start the business. I tried to go out and talk to investors in 2010. And they all told me this was a really, really